Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks for tuning in. We've got a lot of news to get to today, but first I'd like to introduce Nomi Konst, who is filling in on the left side of the table today.
Good morning.
You've done the show before with Amber. Was that fun?
It was a blast. Always a blast debating.
Great.
I'm sure we're going to have a lot of conversation today.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Well, we will get to our top news story in just a minute. We will be discussing, of course, the tragedy, terrible tragedy in Georgia, where 2 teachers and students were killed by 14-year-old gunmen. There's also a lot else to get to today. The Biden administration has slapped sanctions on Russia, claiming that country fueled misinformation and also funneled money to some right-wing pundits to spout pro-Russia talking points. We will definitely be talking about that. We're also going to be taking a look at why Kamala Harris isn't faring so well with Latino voters as her Democratic predecessors have. But first, let's indeed get to that horrible shooting story. The Georgia town of Winder shattered after the deadly shooting at Apalachee High School on Wednesday morning. 4 were killed in the shooting rampage, 2 students and 2 teachers. 9 others were wounded.
I was listening and you could hear gunshots like just ringing out through the school, and like you're just wondering like which one of those is going to be somebody that you're like best friends with or somebody that you love.
It was just like, when are we going to get out? Like, are we going to be safe? Or it's just what's going to happen. Like, am I safe? I'm safe. I just kept on like telling myself that I'm okay. And then I texted my mom. I was like, I'm okay. It was just about me being safe.
The suspected gunman, 14-year-old Colt, a student at the school, immediately surrendered to the school resource officer and was taken into custody alive. According to Chris Hosey, the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, he will be charged with murder and tried as an adult. Gray used an AR-15 style weapon.
Reports say that the FBI had Gray on their radar last year. Law enforcement took him and his father in for questioning over anonymous tips about online threats to commit a school shooting. The topic of gun violence has taken a backseat to other hot-button topics like abortion and immigration until yesterday. Vice President Kamala Harris reacted during her rally in New Hampshire. Take a look.
This is just a senseless tragedy on top of so many senseless tragedies. And it's just outrageous that every day in our country, in the United States of America, that parents have to send their children to school worried about whether or not their child will come home alive. It's senseless. It is. We've got to stop it. And we have to end this epidemic of gun violence in our country once and for all.
GOP nominee Donald Trump had this to say.
I mentioned we had this terrible shooting in Georgia.
Right.
Our prayers are with our friends in Georgia. And I've been doing town halls and interviews in public with you for all these years since you got into the political arena. And I told this audience, never before have restrictions been so tight, obviously after the assassination attempt as well. And Director Ray said the threat level has never been this bad. He said it 5 consecutive times before Congress. What is going on?
Well, it's a sick and angry world for a lot of reasons, and we're going to make it better. We're going to heal our world.
Terribly tragic, obviously. Now, but the fact that this shooter was known to law enforcement does then always raise this question of, well, what was done about that? They're saying, well, we didn't have reason to hold him or arrest him, and I understand we can't just like willy-nilly arrest anyone who manifests some deviant behavior, but so often, this was the case in Parkland too, where we're told, see something, say something, and then we found out, people spoke up, people reported this deranged person, and law enforcement didn't do anything about it.
Exactly.
So I don't know.
I mean, maybe there's something in our gun laws in certain states where, okay, if we can't come to some sort of compromise, which we should, in terms of stricter gun laws, maybe there's something in terms of flagging. If the FBI has flagged somebody in the past, then at least do not sell guns to them.
Well, we all think a 14-year-old shouldn't have a gun.
Don't
He's
sell.
14.
Yeah, 14. He's 14.
No guns.
His parents shouldn't have them. I mean,
Right.
maybe there should be a clearer pipeline of information with those who are providing guns, if they are purchasing them legally, which the father did, of course. And that's the troubling situation here is, like you said, we have systems in place and people are doing what they're supposed to do, and yet it's still happening. I mean, the gun crisis is much bigger, and that needs to be addressed at the federal level, undeniably. And I think people will be voting on this. I mean, we've been discussing all the other issues, and it is quite odd that this has not come up in a lot of these conversations, especially since this school had lockdown procedures. The kids were prepared. They were knowledgeable. They knew what their teachers were doing when they closed the doors and locked them. I mean, it was actually quite sad to listen to the students talk about being in the room and understanding what was at risk here and how they've been prepared for it. But despite all of these procedures, we still have a gun crisis in America, and leaders just don't want to do anything.
We do. I mean, I would argue that the kind of gun crisis we have is mostly distinct from the school shooting problem or the mass shooting problem, which is like is 0.00 something 1% of the actual total gun deaths in this country that are mostly handgun deaths, crime, suicide, domestic violence, workplace violence, what we see in some of our inner cities, that kind of thing. A very difficult problem to grapple with because there's just so many guns out there. There's people, and often the crimes are being committed by people who are already under our existing laws because they have prior records, are not supposed to have access to firearms. There's already a law to prevent them. It's just not being enforced. So I always wonder if we can, because I don't want to, I'm a libertarian. I don't want to disarm law-abiding people. I'm obviously, show me the evidence or show me the argument for why this restriction would be good and not infringe on people's rights and make people safer. I'd be all for it. But I wonder, we have these gun laws on the books that look to me like they're not being enforced.
Right.
And then I go, well, then what good is a new law going to do if we're already letting people who are not supposed to under current law have access to firearms, who are committing the vast majority of the day-to-day gun crimes, we're not doing anything about it. What good would a new law even do then?
And cracking down on the networks that are smuggling guns into states where there are stricter gun laws, where there is more enforcement, like New York or Illinois. I mean, I know conservatives love to talk about Illinois, like they have strong gun laws. Yes, but there are guns being smuggled over the border from states where there are weak gun laws. So maybe the feds or states need to work together to crack down on these smuggling efforts that, whether it's organized crime or other efforts to loosen the gun laws. I mean, there's loopholes everywhere. The gun shows have loopholes. I mean, that can be cracked down on. There's so many different aspects of the law in which, state authorities can really push further, especially with those gun shows like in Arizona and Texas. I mean, there's been an independent investigation, secret camera operations to show how a lot of these guys will sell despite the fact that they have clear information that they shouldn't be selling to certain people.
But the school shooting situation, it is a difficult problem to address, clearly, because it's not that frequent that it happens, thank goodness, but it does happen. Yeah. And, how do you stop, the vast majority of people who own AR-15s use them responsibly, and their kids don't steal them and shoot up a school. And one in a gazillion times something like this happens. And so then we have to go, well, what were the signs? Did we know? Could something have been followed through on? What is the mental health situation like in our schools? Because schools are really unpleasant environments for a lot of kids. A lot of kids get bullied, have to contend with other kinds of stresses. And one in a million snaps like this, and how do you stop it? It's a difficult problem.
It's a very American problem too. I mean,
that's true.
There are mass shootings around the globe, but at no relationship to American mass shootings. I mean, when Australia had that one mass shooting, they cracked down on their gun laws, and it had an impact. But simultaneously, we have a mental health crisis. We're not providing adequate resources to these schools to provide support for students who are having more mental health issues because of social media, which we've been fully aware of that. So as kids are feeling the effects of social media, normal bullying that happens as a child, they don't have that support system in place as well because we just don't want to fund it. And we need to fund mental health support. If Republicans want to say, it's about mental health, then great, go fund mental health. Mm-hmm. Go fund our schools, our public schools.
I also wanted to point out that it seems like the police response in this instance was very competent, and we should applaud that because it's not always the case. Obviously, what happened the last one in Uvalde, Texas, where the police waited outside the room for an hour as the kids were dying on the classroom inside, trapped in there with the shooter, contrary to all police instruction. They are, in fact, supposed to approach, attack, all-out assault on the shooter. You do not treat it like a hostage situation. You are supposed to confront the shooter. That's what was done here, and they were actually able to take him into custody, which is pretty remarkable.
So maybe there's some lessons being learned, but clearly not enough and not soon enough. And hopefully this does re-enter the conversation during the presidential election. It doesn't just go away like many other news items in the past. So the time, I thought in 2013, after Parkland, or after the Newtown, exactly, that something would have happened. But, I think people are also just getting tired of this conversation.
Well, and it's the broader issue of violence in our society. I mean, Donald Trump was almost just killed several weeks ago. I think it is on people's mind, the time we're living through, a time of tension and violence. More Rising right after this. Stay with us.